It's hard to imagine a building with a more brutal and tragic past than Fremantle Museum. It was built in the 1860s to house convict men and women who had gone insane after suffering the cruelties of the British penal system. It was called Fremantle Lunatic Asylum, and before the installation of padded cells, prisoners were chained and doused with cold water if they became uncontrollable. The building has had a haunted reputation for as long as people can remember, and according to staff in the old limestone museum, no less than 4 ghosts now roam its rambling corridors. Visitors to the museum have also had strange experiences. One witness is producer and director Jerry Atkinson, who wrote a play about a ghost and staged it in the museum quadrangle at night. The leading lady, a girl called Judy, was in period costume, and at intermission he followed her into the building to discuss the next scene.
And I noticed her going up the steps to the dressing room, because the dressing room was upstairs. And I followed her, calling out, "Judy, I'd like to talk to you about a change in one of the moves." But I didn't get an answer. I noticed her just walking up the steps, and there she was in this old gown, and I kept on calling and she didn't answer. And then she went into the dressing room. I saw her go into the dressing room. The door closed. Well, first of all, that was against the rules, because I had a rule in that particular production. That door was not to be shut because we had children in the cast. And then I thought perhaps she was a little bit upset, as happens in plays. So I knocked on the door and found it was locked and called out. No answer. I was getting a bit annoyed about this, really. And then all of a sudden, I heard a voice. I turned, and there was the real Judy behind me, coming up the stairs after I'd been up to knock on the door. Well, we opened the door, and when we went in, there wasn't a soul there. And
was there any other way out?
No, there were only windows, and there's a sheer drop. It's the first story. And
did you check the room to see if anyone was hiding there?
Yes, we did. We looked right round. We couldn't find a soul.
Over the years, several staff members have testified to seeing the ghost of a woman which carries a lamp and moans softly as it wanders the museum galleries at night. The ghost seems to be endlessly searching for something, and they believe the apparition is that of a convict woman who went mad with grief after her young daughter was abducted more than a century ago. Records show the woman eventually committed suicide by jumping from the first-floor window of what is now the Investigator Gallery. The ghost seems to react most strongly when young schoolgirls visit the old asylum. Mrs. Emily Johansson, a former museum attendant, witnessed one such incident.
But a building with that type of cruelty and sadness, there must be some waves left behind, and that's what I always did feel. When anything had happened, it was always either this agitation or aggression. 3 young teenagers came down from John Curtin High School. All of a sudden, 2 locked this other one in the cell.
Chloe, stop it! Hang on, it's not a game anymore. Let me out!
Shrugged me off and shot off like a scared rabbit. But it was the feeling at that time of, I'd say agitation is the term that comes to mind.
Is it possible that it was simply the wind?
No, oh no, Recherche Gallery, well, you know, it's quite sheltered really. There's no way, not even a gale would come in there.
Did you notice that Fremantle Museum had the apparition of a living person, the leading lady at the play? We now know that such apparitions occur when people have out-of-the-body experiences, so that if we could somehow find a way of inducing those out-of-the-body experiences, we could perhaps produce apparitions to order. One way is to put the person in a sensory isolation tank. They are floated in warm water in complete silence and darkness. In a little while, some people feel that they have left their bodies and they can be asked to try and visit a particular place and bring back a report of what they see. This type of research has obvious military applications for spying and is being explored by both the Russians and Americans. But when an apparition confronts a scientist unexpectedly, it's much more difficult to study. Take the case of the CSIRO researcher who saw the grey ghost of a girl who died the previous century.
The 152-year-old mansion, Stowell House, is Tasmania's headquarters for Australia's scientific research organisation, the CSIRO. Stowell sits on Battery Point, the most historic section of the state capital, Hobart, and there's a century-old legend that an upper story of the old building is haunted by the grey ghost of a beautiful girl called Amy. Of course, scientists scoffed at the story when they first took over the mansion in 1949. They included the head of research development, Dr. Don Martin.
In those days, to work back a lot because I was trying to do scientific work as well as administrative, and I noticed that the footsteps down below, which I would go down to investigate to find no one there, and I thought, oh well, wind and movement in an old building. I used to have an office upstairs, and seated at the desk looking straight at the doorway, I was conscious of this figure of a young woman, I would think, 18 or so, dressed in what appeared, it wasn't in Technicolor, it appeared to be as if it was a grey dress, full skirt, probably a hoop at the bottom. So I'm not sure, I think my impression was half sleeves, but it was, as you got towards the neck and above, it was transparent. I looked up and saw it standing there, then it moved down the corridor to the right.
Did it scare you out of your wits?
No, I didn't. I was surprised to see it more. I was sort of surprised. My reaction time's fairly slow, I think.
Did you think of investigating it or experimenting with it?
Oh, no, I didn't. I sort of felt that this was out of my field altogether, being a botanist by training, which is fairly prosaic.
Did you believe in ghosts before you saw the apparition? Not
consciously, no. I'm not a very religious person, but I always felt that anyone who believed in any sort of life after death would have to really consider the possibility that there would be ghosts.
You must have thought about it a lot as well. Did you consider the possibility as to whether or not it may be an hallucination of some form?
Well, it might be in my mind, but I can't connect it to any past experience which would lead me to think it was just something projected from past experience.
You know, I can sympathise with Dr. Martin. In cases like that, where a ghost appears only very infrequently, it's very difficult to set up instruments so that you can investigate it scientifically. Instruments like cameras, tape recorders, recording thermometers, and even infrared detectors have been used to monitor haunted houses. But in our next case, the investigators, most imaginatively, have used a new type of detector which they designed and built themselves.